Okay, I've been told we don't have a lot of time, so I will try and finish the last of this and then you'll have time for questions. What did you want to say about this? You want to put it back in?
I just want to explain
Their issues as well. Okay. I see. I can carry on from before. We'll get to that, don't worry. All right, come in, sit down. Okay, so let's carry on. So, the League of Nations. Who has heard of the League of Nations? Put your hand up if you've heard of it. Oh, one person. Nice. Who has heard of League of Legends? Nah, I'm just kidding. So it's not surprising that you haven't heard of it. The League of Nations was the predecessor to the United Nations. It came before it, but it disbanded. It was closed about 80 years ago. It was launched in 1920 by American President Woodrow Wilson, but his own country refused to join it and actually sabotaged its efforts for success. So because of secret alliances between nations, everyone increasing armaments and the amount of guns and so on, blocking trade and taking territory from other countries, all of which are things that are still happening today, the League of Nations failed to prevent World War II and was subsequently disbanded because it didn't succeed. Now, that's a picture of the conference from the League of Nations, but it only lasted until 1939 when World War II broke out. So after World War II, they made the United Nations, which is basically the same thing, except this time, all the major world powers, the US, the USSR, which is the Soviet Union, what used to be Russia, or what Russia used to be, excuse me, the UK, France, China, and India were all signatories of the UN from day one. The bulk of the African continent would join later in the 60s, the areas in green, and the Central Asia, shown in dark green, and some other areas would join later in the 90s. So what's the UN all about? Well, for starters, it was a lot more successful than its predecessor, the League of Nations. For starters, it actually still exists today, and it has in its time ratified many significant treaties, such as the Convention on Human Rights, Children's Rights, Women's Rights, and many others. However, it has also faced criticism, particularly for failing to achieve resolutions in many major conflicts throughout the Cold War, such as Vietnam and Korea, and also seeing not much success in the numerous ongoing conflicts in the Middle East. It is also argued that the UN would be a lot more effective if it underwent fundamental structural reform, so if they changed the way it works, basically. For example, removing veto powers, which is when the powerful countries can just throw a tantrum basically and say, no, I don't want that. And also just improving balance between the global north and global south. At the moment, obviously, it's accused of disproportionately favoring the countries in blue. Another significant challenge is the representation of indigenous and nomadic people. The UN only represents countries at the national level, the government. So if the government, for example, doesn't care about its native people, which might be the case, and this is only an example, in Malaysia or in Brazil or in Canada, the UN can't really do anything because those people aren't represented by the government. This actually links to the example I had earlier of the people who live in Borneo, maybe the Iban or the Bidayu, whose lands are being taken, sometimes for palm oil plantations, sustainable palm oil, which involves burning down rainforest, or to build, massive areas get flooded to build dams. The UN is designed to solve problems between nations, not within nations. Now, I'm not just here to shit talk the UN. On a more positive note, we can say that it has had some success in other areas, especially with civil, climate, and environmental causes, such as to repair the hole in the ozone layer, in the Earth's atmosphere. So the Montreal Protocol, which was meant to fix that, basically banned a lot of pollutant chemicals that were making this hole worse and worse, and it basically lets a lot more harmful radiation from the sun come in. We've basically fixed the hole now, and this was basically seen as the most successful treaty the UN has ever made. And it was also universally ratified, which means every single country on Earth that was in the UN agreed, yeah, let's do this, this is good. However, the climate crisis has not seen as much success, and I'm sure you've heard of that. Most of the agreements for it are non-binding, meaning that if the country doesn't do what it was told, nothing happens. So of course, a lot of countries just don't bother and don't care, because the problem is in the future. So we're not achieving anywhere near what we need to prevent global catastrophe. But this is where you guys might be able to change things. So, Model United Nations, what the heck is an MUN? It's when you basically get a group of people and you pretend to be the UN. Now, why would you do that? Well, it's great for understanding how the UN works. It's great for expanding your knowledge about current affairs. It's good for improving confidence with public speaking. It's fun, that's allowed. It looks good on CVs when you're applying for studies or opportunities abroad. And also, you can join with other schools across Malaysia. So I actually Googled and found that there's a whole group in Malaysia that unite all the Model United Nations teams from different schools, and they do bigger scale debates and things like that. So I think that's very cool and worth looking into. Now, how do you make one? Well, you need at least 20 students, maybe 30, 40 is even better. You pick an issue to discuss. You could pick the climate situation, you could pick the Palestine-Israel conflict, pick something controversial so that there's actually things to talk about. A chair, which is essentially just a person who sits in the middle calming everyone down, will arbitrate. That means they will listen to both sides and try and get them to come to an agreement. In general, you don't want to just copy what the UN does. You want to actually exaggerate it a little bit and kind of push it towards what you wish the UN would do, which is, for example, ban all nuclear weapons and actually do something about climate change. And there are also lots of online guides that can help explain in much more detail how to run one of these. Now, one of the reasons Mrs. Xiao got me to talk is because I was told that last year when you did an MUN, not you guys, obviously it's the guys who left, but you guys were really, really shy, and you just kind of read a little bit, and then you didn't really say anything or debate things properly with the other team. So I just want to say that do get involved in these. Do try and emulate the amount of disagreements and arguments that they have in the real UN. You need to really pretend, oh, I represent Russia and I represent the US, and be at each other's throats. Say, I want this territory, no you can't have it, why, and discuss what reasons you should have it or they shouldn't. Or equally, you can represent small island nations who are slowly going underwater because of global warming and sea level rise. And they should really fight because all their citizens are going to lose their livelihoods, lose their jobs. So they should accuse major world powers like the US and the West and say, hey, you can't keep doing this. So you really need to be enthusiastic and passionate about it. You can't just sort of say, well, my country is suffering and I wish you would stop. No, you've got to be more powerful, more poignant. I actually give you an example. Right now, you might think, oh, look at this guy, he's so confident, he's standing, talking in front of all of us. I'm not like that, but actually you can train yourself to be like this very easily. I used to be so shy, I had trouble with phone calls. I couldn't call people, I was terrified. I had to write down a script, what am I gonna say? I couldn't order food at a restaurant. I couldn't even say, oh, no, I couldn't say it, I was too scared. So anyone can master it. You just slowly teach yourself, get a little bit better. Expose yourself in an environment like this. No one's going to eat you. These are all your classmates. You will be completely fine. So hopefully this year, get a little bit more engagement. So we're actually towards the end now, so just a quick recap. I know at points I went through very fast, but it's because I want to get to the end so there's time for your questions. So what did we do? We thought about the problems the world is facing today. We discussed a little bit about where they came from and how to approach them. I talked about my personal journey in studies and in work. We looked at some ways of finding good extracurricular opportunities, like volunteering, for example. We went through a brief history of the UN. And lastly, we learned the basics of how to set up an MUN. So, some closing remarks. So at the beginning I said I would give a little bit of advice I wish I had received when I was 18 and your age. We've obviously talked a lot about the world, the UN, the MUN, but not everyone will end up working there, that's fair enough. I don't even work for the UN. Some people who did my courses do, but most don't. So for the conclusion I wanted to return to these pieces of advice, and I've narrowed them down into 3 things starting with the letter C, so it's easy to remember. The first one is commitment. You need to actually study for your exams. I know you've just had some exams, but in general, you need to really commit to learning, to studying, and you need to know why you're trying to achieve something, not just doing it blindly. If you don't know what you're doing, of course, you're not going to succeed in it. You need to do a bit of reading. And this will require a lot of time, it will require a lot of effort, but it is worth it, because then you will have the power to convince yourself and others around you. And moreover, it's your future that you're fighting for, so it is worth the hard work to get to it. Next, we have confidence. We just spoke about this basically, but you mustn't be scared of speaking up. You may have to challenge peers, you may have to challenge authority figures who have very old-fashioned ways of thinking. You need to be able to say, no, this is wrong, you've got to look at it like this. It's not something scary, nobody is going to beat you down. People usually respect you for standing up for yourself and giving your genuine opinion. Obviously, don't be arrogant. Don't think you know everything. You must always respect others and listen to them. But you must also be willing to stand up and say, "Hey, I think that's not right," if that's what you need to do. And lastly, community. You're not by yourselves. I'm not talking to one person here. I'm talking about 180 of you. By yourself, you may get exhausted. You may burn out, and you may think, "Oh, there's nothing that can be done. The problems are too big. The world is too large." But no, if you reach out to others who care about these issues too and talk to them, maybe together you can create ideas or activities that you wouldn't have thought of by yourself. And also you can lift each other's spirits and morale. And that's actually really important. You can't give in to something called fatalism. You can't just say, that's just the way it is, nothing will ever change. Things have changed historically.